Og nå, for inspirasjon, så skal vi over på engelsk. Fordi vi skal nemlig la oss inspirere av et prosjekt fra Redruth, Cornwall i England. So, to give a best practice example of how an existing building can be transformed into a thriving space for art and culture, we are privileged to have Felix Mortimer with us today. He is one of the founders of the Ladder, an old library from 1895 in Cornwall that has been transformed into a place for performance-related organizations to develop new work. Felix works with Josh Norris and has done so over the past 12 years, running the theatre company Rift together. Felix has also worked part-time for the Mayor of London's cultural team. And, as it says on the webpage for the Ladder, he makes a mean sourdough and brews slightly undrinkable beer. Welcome, Felix. We look forward to hear more about the Ladder.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And it's so nice to be here in Oslo, where I've never been before. But I haven't brought any of my beer, so you're thanking me probably. So that's the Ladder there. And as Anna said, my name is Felix Mortimer, and I run this building, a creative space in an old library in Redruth, Cornwall. The Ladder comprises of a nursery, a café, rehearsal rooms, and a co-working space. From the Ladder, I also run Harbour Festival, a biennial international theatre festival that spills out of the building into car parks, churches, cinemas, all in the town of Redruth. And I've spent most of my career, as Anna said, making theatre and events in London and worked in cultural policy there as well. So you're probably asking, where is Redruth? That's exactly what I asked as well. So it's there, pretty much at the end of the UK, which is its biggest strength and its biggest weakness. It's a small town with a proud history and some real challenges. It's in a rural part of Cornwall in the southwest of England. A place which is loved by holidaymakers in the summer, but can feel a little bit left behind the rest of the year. Today, I want to tell you a bit about the Ladder, what it is, how it came to be, and the projects that led up to it, and how this old library has been reborn for a new community in Redruth, but also beyond, and talk a bit about what we will hope it will become in the years ahead. So back to that's what it looked like when it first opened. So the Ladder is a beautiful set of granite buildings, around 130 years old, built at the height of Cornwall's mining boom. Back then, Cornish miners were travelling around the world, sending their earnings back home to Redruth and helping to fund this grand architecture that still lines our streets. Redruth had gone global to the extent that people used to joke, if there's a hole dug anywhere in the world, you're sure to find a Cornishman at the bottom. Our building was designed by James Hicks and paid for by the philanthropist Passmore Edwards, a man who passionately believed in the power of social mobility, having grown up in a pub and learnt to read at his church's Sunday school. He famously said, if you can give the poor a ladder, they will climb. We were also pleased when we researched him a little bit, and he didn't have a dubious past. Instead, he turned out to have made all his money in newspapers, turned down 3 knighthoods, and campaigned against the slave trade and the death penalty. Been a lifelong vegan, and given away 90% of his wealth building libraries and colleges for others to benefit from. I wish the same could be said of today's billionaires. He was the kind of eccentric that wanted to build one library for every letter of his name, and he managed it. Our building, one of the first, was built in 1894 from local granite from the quarry 1 mile away in Cornwall, and began its life as a college and library. We still have many people who came to learn to read for the first time there, and some that were even born in the building. This photo is the opening of the building. when a day of holiday was declared in the town, and Passmore Edwards, I think that's him there at the top, reminisced in his speech about selling strawberries on this same street corner when he was 8 years old. Over time, the building expanded to house the Cornwall archives, all of the documents and records of the county. But in 2020, these archives moved to Crescent-Kerno, one of the biggest heritage projects in the UK, and the library moved down the road, leaving the building empty, just as the pandemic had begun. As all of this was happening in Redruth, well, not this was 130 years previous, but as the pandemic was settling in Redruth, I was working in London. I've been running a theatre venue and nightclub in North London called Sticks, which had just closed, and my business partner Josh had moved to Cornwall to be nearer to his family. I travelled to Cornwall to work on a theatre project here at Bill's Attic, the remnants of theatre maker Bill Mitchell's collection of props, when on the Cornwall Council website, I came across a beautiful derelict building in Redruth. We stepped past the fencing and found a place full of mould, broken windows, and old carpets, but also light, history, and potential. There was a courtyard, a turret, and something a bit magical about it. So how would we ever make it work? The situation in the arts during the pandemic was at rock bottom. Over the past 15 years, arts funding in the UK had fallen by 30%. In 2023 alone, 125 grassroots venues in the UK had closed down, most citing financial sustainability as the key reason for that closure. So grassroots organisations had no other choice than in order to get creative to survive, finding ways to cut costs by using empty shops, warehouses, forgotten spaces. Theatre company like Punch Drunk in this picture, Shunt, and Secret Cinema helped pioneer this movement, transforming disused buildings into immersive experiences. That spirit of meanwhile use, making the most of empty spaces, also became part of our organisation's DNA and was reflected in our artistic output. Buildings lent projects, atmospheres, and environments, as well as their histories and stories. While this agility meant we could adapt and be creative, it also came at the cost of longevity and sustainability. So what made me think that I could take on such a mammoth task as the library, with rivers of rainwater pouring down the walls? We had some experience on our side. We had managed several buildings in the past, taking them over for performances. So I'm just going to take you through some of those now. So the first one was this shop. In 2011, we took over a small shop on Hoxton Street in East London. That little shop became our home base and the birthplace of a reimagined production of The Tempest, which we turned into a 6-part immersive experience called O Brave New World. Each month, we converted it into a different installation, from a dive bar to a supercomputer, a hotel lobby to a library. Soon, local kids started coming in to play computer games we'd embedded in the walls, chatting to them. We discovered that they lived on the Arden estate, with buildings named after Shakespeare characters, including a Caliban Tower. And with that in mind, we launched a Shakespeare festival, embedding 14 new plays in found spaces across the area. We then staged Kafka's The Trial, moving audiences through from Shoreditch Town Hall to our shop, and then the Rose Lippmann building, another beautiful repurposed community space and library. That led on to Macbeth at the Balfron Tower in Poplar, where audiences met witches in the car park and battles raged on the roof. It was raw and ambitious and unforgettable, and the Brutalist building was the star. Eventually, that's it there. Eventually, we created our first venue. It looked nicer than this, eventually. Sticks, in an old ambulance depot and car park in North London, where I grew up, blending performance, community events, and nightlife, and eventually welcoming 75,000 people a year. Sticks was open for 5 years. It looked like that eventually. And then closed just before the pandemic. Here we were beginning to learn what culture could do with communities. So fast forward, we're back in Cornwall again. It's 2021. We found ourselves standing in an old Victorian library with no money and just a big dream. We'd negotiated a peppercorn rent of £1 a year with the council. We'd formed a not-for-profit company, which would go on to become The Ladder. and supported by the Architectural Heritage Fund, we began to make a plan. Rehearsal space, nursery, co-working, a vision for how the building could start serving the community again. We held open days, that's me, listened to and involved local people in key decisions, and found out that everyone had a story to tell about that place. In 2022, we held a community day where hundreds of people came, and by public vote, we had all these buckets where everyone could put a coin in, and there was 5 different names, some Cornish names. One was the Folly, and one was the Ladder, and the one with the ladder was brimming over. I did put a few more coins in that one because I think the Folly would have been a terrible name. Eventually, we were called the Ladder, a nod to Passmore Edwards' belief that education was as the ladder to a better life. Then, with some help from Cornwall Council and Historic England, we secured emergency funding to stop decay and fix some windows. Slowly, the building was beginning to breathe again. And bit by bit, that life did return. Writer's Block, a charity that runs writing workshops and residencies, moved in. Beets and Roots Cafe, a veggie and vegan cafe, opened in a horse box in our garden. And families, artists, musicians began to flow through the doors again. We then secured some government funding to buy the building outright and transform the old college into naturally learning nursery, now serving 80 families a week. And these are the creatives of the future. This is the nursery, and I wanted to show you this slide because it shows a really nice detail, I think. The windows in the shape of the clouds, which are part of the architect's original design, now reflected in the play loft where the toddlers play in the nursery. With further investment from the Shared Prosperity Fund, a big government fund, we modernised the old library, creating some new spaces. The front room, our community space, the work room, upstairs a co-working space, the engine room, which is like a performance space with a dance floor, and the dream room in the turret. These spaces completed the plans we made 3 years previously, spaces for creators, makers, and performers. Now, that makes it sound very, very easy. We actually had our fair share of setbacks. Leaks, our roof collapsed, we were delayed, so much so that when we had a group of writers in residence during the building of our building, they all wrote not about fun things in their lives, they wrote about the swimming pool-sized puddle that appeared in our lobby. But thanks to support from the Community Ownership Fund, another central government fund, and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the building now stands proud again, ready for a new generation. Throughout the building works, we've kept culture alive in our walls, from bunker cabaret made in Ukraine in the beginning of the war and performed in our old reading room, to K-pop dance classes. We've worked to ensure the building never stood still, even when it was filled with builders. Last year, with the building half finished, we launched Harbour Festival, a biennial linking Cornwall with artists from across Europe, Ukraine, Belgium, Brittany, Norway, and Wales. Activities spilled out from the ladder onto the streets and into unused buildings across Redruth. And we made great friends from all over the world who've come back to Redruth again and again. We also explored our heritage and worked with Hall for Cornwall, biggest theatre in Cornwall, and Falmouth University, our biggest university, as well as the people of Redruth, to rediscover stories that shape the town's identity, from Passmore Edwards' legacy to Bill Mitchell's attic to the dreams of our young people. We published a newspaper called Made in Redruth, which celebrated creativity and stories of the town, trying to change the narrative. We made dolls' houses with toddlers to dream with them about what the ladder will be like in another generation. Our model blends earned income from rents and grant funding to try and build that resilience. One of the best pieces of advice we got early on from another Passmore Edwards building cast in Helston. They pulled me to one side at the end of a tour and said, "We have art studios that provide regular income to cover our core costs so that we can just do our mission and our activities and all the fun bits." At Styx, the nightclub I was talking about in North London, our bar and events subsidise 5 nights of theatre a week. In Redruth, it's the nursery, which occupies 40% of our site, but also keeps our lights on. As we move to restoring the building and filling it with life, we're focusing on the next challenge, and it is a challenge, funding that activity as well as just the architecture. So, what's the point? Why are we doing all this? The blood, the sweat, the tears. For a long time, culture was seen as a nice to have, something for when times were good. But all the evidence now shows the opposite. Culture is an essential ingredient to allow our towns and cities to thrive. Put simply, investing in creativity pays back. According to the Arts Council in England, for every £1 invested in arts and culture in the UK, £1.50 is then generated into the local economy. Not to mention wider value that can't be measured in numbers. Grayson Perry, the potter and artist, once said, "Artists are the shock troops of gentrification." In London, I saw that firsthand. We made Tottenham vibrant and then got priced out for the very success we'd helped to create. Sticks, that I showed you earlier, is now a 36-floor tower block and a Starbucks. Artists are being squeezed out of cities. That's why small towns and rural places have a huge opportunity. They can support artists, sustain heritage buildings, and creativity, all sustainably. But beyond economics, it's also about connection. When we first opened the doors of the Ladder, a local resident said, a woman in her 70s came up to us and said, "I walk past this building every day, and it was sad when it was empty, covered in fencing with broken windows. Now I see the lights on, I hear the music, and it's like Redruth's heart is beating again." And that is what this is really about. Civic pride, community, and belonging. Culture has so many intangible benefits. Singing can reduce postnatal depression, opera can reduce COVID symptoms and help people to breathe again. We now see that echoed a bit in Redruth, in the people who come to our dance and our theatre and writing groups each week. These moments of creativity are not just good for the soul, they're good for your health. And of course, it creates jobs and livelihoods. Businesses at the Ladder now employ over 25 people and support more freelancers, artists, and small businesses who use our spaces. Every event, every nursery placement and rehearsal ripples outwards to the local economy. And there's a bigger picture here too. Meanwhile use, these temporary buildings, temporary takeovers of buildings have been vital for artists to survive, but survival shouldn't have to depend on short leases and uncertain futures. We need to hardwire creativity into our towns to make sure culture isn't the first thing cut when times get tough, but the foundation that we build on. As high streets are changed by online shopping and out-of-town retail parks, artists have a role to play to build those spaces and places for the community to come together. And in communities like Redruth, where identities is linked to industries that were lost throughout the 1900s, we need to fight for the status of the creative industries. The fastest growing industry in the UK, 50% bigger now than it was in 2010. Because if we don't invest, if we allow these spaces to fade and skills to fade, we risk losing more than just art. We lose the shared places where people meet, greet, talk, imagine together. We lose a bit of who we are. That's why we're doing this, to prove that creativity isn't a luxury, it's the lifeblood of a thriving, resilient community. Which is why I really welcome the launch of this fund and all the possibilities it creates for you guys in Norway, its creative spaces and its places. And today, after 4 years of graft and generosity and stubbornness, the Ladder stands tall, not just as a monument to the past, but also as a working, creative home for creativity in Redruth and Cornwall. Inside its granite walls are rehearsal rooms, workspaces, but most importantly, people with stories to tell. And we don't know what the stories that will be told yet, but we know that there will be many. Thank you very much.